today's topic, we're going to be deep diving into, are you winning or losing in digital collaboration? SWOOP Analytics is a company. We have been looking at benchmarking for years now, and it's something that we're really passionate about. Recently, though, we've seen some really interesting perspectives and viewpoints around benchmarking emerging online just through our LinkedIn feeds, and we thought it'd also be a great opportunity today to talk through some of those different perspectives. Before I get into things as well, if I can just also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're hosting today's online session, and also the traditional custodians of the land where all of our participants are located today. And today I'm joining from the central coast of New South Wales, so I would like to acknowledge the Darkinjung people, and I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Thank you for being here today. As always with these sessions, we like to keep things light and interactive. So if you have any questions or if you have any comments throughout, please do use the meeting chat to ask questions, comments, whatever you'd like to add, even your own perspectives around benchmarking or what your thoughts are. Today we're going to be asking a big question at the start of the session, and we'll be asking to benchmark or not to benchmark. I do get asked by customers quite a lot around benchmarking and targets and goal setting, so we'll deep dive into a bit of that. We're going to ask you a few questions as well through a quick poll. So if you do have a mobile device handy, it can be quite easy just to answer those poll questions on your mobile device. So have that nearby and ready to go. I'm going to be talking to Laurie a little bit today as well. So Laurie's our Chief Data Scientist, and I'll be asking Laurie some questions about his approach to benchmarking and how we look at this at SWOOP, benefits of benchmarking and all of those sorts of great things. But we also couldn't run a session without making things a little bit practical and tactical for you as well. So we'll be sharing some of our top benchmarks and targets from some of our recent benchmarking studies too. It's also very timely for us to talk about benchmarking because we are currently crunching the numbers for our M365 and Microsoft Teams benchmark report. So we have that to look forward to launching at the end of this month as well. More details to come at the end of today's session too. And we'll make sure we keep it open for Q&A. If you have any questions throughout, we can also cover some questions off at the end of the session if you'd like to stick around. And then we'll be letting you all go maybe for some lunch, or depending on where you're joining us from, maybe a coffee or afternoon tea. My name's Emily. If I haven't met you before, I look after customer success for the APAC region at SWOOP. So talking to customers every single day about digital collaboration, the challenges that they're facing, and also really deep diving into the analytics piece as well, being an analytics organisation. And I'm also joined by my wonderful colleagues. I've got Dr. Laurence here on the call. Laurie is our co-founder and chief data scientist and is responsible for doing all of the analysis for our benchmarking studies. And I'm also joined by Sharon Dawson, who's our director for external relations and comms. And if you've ever read any of our benchmarking reports or any of the case studies on the SWOOP website, Sharon is the genius behind finding those stories and writing them and amplifying them as well. So Sharon also has some interesting points to raise around where we've seen the benefits of benchmarking in the real world as well. So let's get into things. And we have, as I mentioned before, we have seen some really interesting thoughts around benchmarking. Some of them we would consider maybe to be a little bit controversial, but I thought I'd just share a few quick screenshots of some of the articles and things that we've seen around on LinkedIn. The first post here is linking to the screenshot that you can see here in the middle, but it's about asking if benchmarking is a useful exercise. And just to give you a really quick rundown of what that article covers off, it looks at points around some issues that you can encounter from benchmarking if you're basing it on maybe employee communication survey type data. It asks the question around, does benchmarking actually allow you or help you do anything differently? Is it really actionable? It does also then ask you to consider defining success within your own organisation versus comparing to other organisations. But then there is also a nice sort of silver lining towards the end, only that benchmarking can also be a great way to find some of those case studies and being able to present those to leadership teams for further investment, whether it be for more resources or new channels. So there are some ways that article does tackle the pros as well. The second one there does also seem quite strongly worded. Benchmarking is for losers. In all honesty, though, it is quite a fair and robust sort of analysis of benchmarking too. So that particular article is arguing around, for those who are actually winning according to benchmarking, that there is still room for those organisations to learn. But it also then says that, sometimes it could make you focus more so on the status quo as opposed to developing much more unique and fresh strategies in order for your organisation to thrive. But Laurie, I'd really be interested for you to, I don't know, do you have like a bit of a rebuttal to some of these points? How do you feel about some of this, and what's your perspective?
Well, I guess you can always find an excuse for not comparing yourself with somebody because you're different, right? So, but in reality, we're always benchmarking. Now, the word benchmarking is a bit scary for some people, but if we use the word comparing, and we're comparing ourselves with others or some sort of standard or whatever, we're doing it every day. Sort of you go to the supermarket, you buy stuff, and you look at your grocery bill. Is my bill bigger than it should be? You get water bills, you get electricity bills, you go to the doctor, you get your blood pressure measured. You're getting surrounded by numbers all the time, and mostly you're asking yourself, how good is this or how bad is that? In fact, it's probably more like, I can live with not being the best, but I really can't live with being the worst or something like that. So me, it's just like a human condition. So yeah, in some situations, you should try and find like to like, but in fact, we get a sense of what things that we want to compare against and what we want to believe, and if you do want to change, you do want to know sort of how much you need to do to make that positive change, whether it's at work or in your just general life. So I see some of these issues. I do respect the points they're making, but in essence, it's nearly just like a human condition. We're always comparing. We're always wanting to compare. We always want to, whether we use the word benchmarking or not, we always want to compare.
Laurie, for some of the points on like it's quite clearly articulated on the first post here around, comparing United Airlines and Emirates or, across different industries. Would you have any perspective on why that would still be a valid exercise to look at?
I think most executives in an industry want to be sure. They do want to know how they compare with their competitors, right? So in that sense, it does make sense that if you're an airline, you want to compare yourself against other airlines and what have you. But at the same time, when we compete, we try and become different to our competitors. So it's not so much that maybe it's better to look at how you compare with an adjacent industry or something like that, because you may want to be stretching yourself to be different from the competition. So in some ways, some of the arguments about benchmarking making us all look the same are correct. So again, it comes down to what you feel is important for you. So if you're one of these sort of innovating, want to be different type firms, maybe you still might want to benchmark, but you might want to benchmark yourself against people that aren't in your industry or something like that. So, but as I said, we are comparing, and we're always wanting to compare. It's up to you and what your context is to decide what you're going to compare against. I think it's fruitless to say, we can live without comparing ourselves at all. I think that's just that's a fool's world, in my view.
Strong words from Laurie there. I think that was you put up a good argument against some of those different articles that we're seeing. But we also would like to hear from those of you attending today as well. So at this point, I'd also like to get you thinking about what digital collaboration looks like for you and your organization, and this big question around if you think that you're winning or losing, which I know is sort of two very, very different ends of a spectrum. But if you just want to use your device, you can use the QR code, or you can head to menti.com. If you attend these SWOOP sessions and our webinars quite a lot, then you'll be quite familiar with these polls that we run. So if you just want to use that code, or the QR code, I think, is usually quite easy. And if you jump in there now, you'll start to see the first question pop up, which is, I think we're asking you about if you feel like you're winning or losing at digital collaboration currently in your organization. So I'll give you all just a minute or two to jump over there. I'm going to take the QR code away in just a few seconds, but if you still need to get in, just head to menti.com and the code will still be showing on the screen. So just bear with me one moment. So first question, are you winning or losing in digital collaboration in your organization? And I think, well, obviously this is quite a bold question to ask. There's sort of no in between, but I understand that there would be quite a few people who may not know if you're currently winning or losing, and there could be a range of reasons why that could be the case. Perhaps you don't quite have the right insights to be looking at yet. Maybe you haven't explored the possibility of benchmarking, and we can talk more about that in detail in just a moment. But I'm also really happy to see that organizations are actually winning in digital collaboration. Of course, we've been having conversations about this for years, and with the pandemic and throughout COVID, it did seem a little bit dire there for a little while. But for our one singular person who is maybe losing at digital collaboration at the moment, I'm sure there'll be a range of great resources that we'll share throughout today to get you on your way with things too. But please also do ask questions. Now let's move into the next. Well, for this one, let's say the overview is that we've got a quite an even split between those who are winning and those who really don't know. Now, the next question is a little bit more open-ended. I think you can just put in a few quick keywords. We'd like to know how do you measure if you're winning or losing in digital collaboration at the moment? So maybe especially for those who say that you are currently winning, how do you measure if you're winning or losing at the moment? How do you figure that out? Are there lots of different ways that you're looking at this? Is it more so a little bit more, anecdotally, if you are looking at collaboration platforms, whether it be Viva Engage or Workplace, or maybe you're looking across some of the admin reports and things across M365 and Teams. Looks like people are, obviously relying on data and analytics to see how that works at the moment. And even sort of deep diving to some of the more specific metrics to see if you're winning or losing. Things like number of views, levels of engagement. Feel free to, I think you can put in up to maybe 3 responses or something. So just any sort of quick fire things that you are looking at specifically. Great to see that some people are using SWOOP. Comparison, I think that's also sort of, I guess, falling into a similar category to benchmarking, or is pretty much the same thing. I will make sure to show you a few examples as well of how you can do that benchmarking internally within your organization too, which I think is one of the very valid points that came out in some of those articles we just spoke to. But then, of course, balancing that out with some of the external benchmarks that we provide as well. Anecdotal, open rates, yes, and this could be across email, could be across intranets or SharePoint. There's lots of different ways that we could look at this as well. But we would also love to start moving toward looking at this in more of a holistic, full digital workplace sense as well. So we've got some cool developments coming at SWOOP over the next little while, and we'll keep you all in the loop with what we're doing there. I'll tease that as a little watch this space. And our final question as well, this is also a bit of a open-ended question. It's sort of just a open field, open-ended, put in as many answers, as much detail as you'd like. What questions would you like benchmarking to answer for your organization? I've got a few quick examples there, and I know that in the previous question, some people had already mentioned things around what, number of views or, just high-level engagement metrics, open rate. Are there any particular questions you would like benchmarking to help you answer? So I've got some examples there just to hopefully get some ideas flowing if you're unsure. What proportion of our people are interacting online? Are there some really simple, high-level participation rate type benchmarks that you'd like to be able to see? Maybe you're having a look at collaboration habits across email, maybe it's Microsoft Teams, being able to see how that balances out and what good looks like. If I click enter, I'll be able to start to see some of the answers they'll reveal on the screen. But yeah, just feel free to start popping some of those in there too. How to get employees engaged, more employees engaged, who in my organization is doing it well, how do I get people to stop using email, how many platforms are too many? I think these are all really solid questions. Laurie, do you have any particular thoughts on this one or any of the answers coming through?
Well, I mean, how do you get people to stop using email? I think in the end of the day, it's how do we get people to use email less? The fact is that, the most recent, the report I'm working on now, people still spend most of their time reading or writing email, but the better people spend less time than the worst people. That's probably the best way I can put it.
Yeah.
Certainly, who is doing well in your organisation? I think that's a very, very important point because, as some of the critics are saying, well, our organisation is different, so our response to that is, well, you can benchmark internally. And and then at least you're within the same organisation. But that's not to say you won't come back and say my department is different to that department or what have you. But you can still reduce that and say, well, how do you compare within your own department? So in terms of what we're calling SWOOP workplace analytics now, and workplace analytics, you can go to whatever granular level you want to go to and whatever time period you want to go to. So in essence, there's sort of you can even compare yourself against yourself last year, right? So if you're going to be cynical, there is always a point of comparison that you can make. And we allow that. You can look at your own habits this year compared to last year if you want to do that. So last week even if you want to do that.
But even to that point around case studies and finding those stories as well. I know that some of the stories that we share would definitely help with some of these questions that people are asking too. But then even better when we have the data to back up how some of those measures are moving as well. So I'll say thank you to the people who had input some answers there. We've got a few last minute ones coming through as well. How do we make sure to focus on the right metrics when there's so much choice? Extremely valid point. We do obviously have a lot of metrics that we look at across all of the different platforms we provide analytics for, but looking to simplify that and actually find a way to make those insights actionable as well, and so that they actually do lead to some sort of change, not just the reporting and benchmarking for the sake of benchmarking and reporting. So yes, let's get into a bit more of some more of the questions that I'd like to ask you, Laurie, as well around benchmarking. If I can just jump back into the slides as well. Why is it important to benchmark?
Well, I mean, as I said, I mean, it's for most people, it's really about, where are we positioned in the whole scope of things. So those people who were saying, well, we don't really know whether we're winning or losing, it's because, you haven't been able to do that sort of meaningful comparison to say, well, this is where we sit. As I said before, you don't necessarily have to say, I want to be the best, but most people say they don't want to be the worst, So when when our customers, when we first from SWOOP's day one, people would say, well, you provided us with all these wonderful numbers, and there's some really interesting stuff we've never seen before, measuring reciprocity and diversity and things like that. We usually only see activity measures, but what's good look like? Are these good numbers? And because they're sort of foreign numbers, sometimes they're saying, well, we'd like to know what good looks like, and that really launched the whole effort around benchmarking. So our first benchmark was with Yammer, and I think we had 15 organisations. Now we've got hundreds. So we think it's knowing where you fit, is important, I think, and having some scale that you can improve against is important. So I've been around long enough to been through all the total quality management and Six Sigma and Lean and design thinking. All of those processes are all about how do we get better, and they're all about measurement and they're all about comparison. So they've all got their different quirks and so forth about how to do that. But in essence, they are benchmarking. By whether they call it that or not, they're basically comparing.
And I'll also just prompt anyone in the session as well, if you do have any questions you'd like to jump in with here for Laurie about benchmarking, or if you're winning or losing in digital collaboration, please do feel free to jump in, or even come off mute if you'd like to. And Laurie, you did also sort of touch on, I guess, why SWOOP started benchmarking in the first place just then in your answer. But I would also be keen to know, like, I know that there's the big reports, but how do you approach it on a specific organization level? How do you approach that benchmarking, and how did that come about at SWOOP?
Well, as I said, we do the big benchmarking reports, which sort of pretty much look at, well, this year we're looking at collaboration as one theme, and later in the year we're going to look at communication as another theme, which will be more the Viva Engage and the SharePoint, whereas this time it's M365 and Teams. We also get a lot of requests for what we call custom benchmarking. So, how do we compare, as an individual firm, and we do this. We do this for some of our clients, but we don't actually try to find a like for like, because some of our samples are big enough now. For example, with Viva Engage, or what's called Yammer, we've got hundreds of organisations in their data from benchmarking different organisations. We anonymise them, of course, and we need to do that with respect to the organisations themselves. What we do is we just simply say, well, out of 150 of our organisations, this metric, this is the average score, right? And this is your score, and this is how much you vary from that average. And sometimes you'll have things that are above the average, well above, and sometimes they'll be well below. Sometimes you'll be able to rationalise those differences because there's a style of business you are, but sometimes you can't. You can sort of say, well, and with these custom benchmarking, I feel like I'm a little bit like, the doctor that sort of sees your blood pressure results or something like that, or your blood sampling results. I look through it all, and you see patterns. You see patterns in the way that organisations are working, and you see areas where they really can improve. And so for example, with Yammer, it's very common for people to just adopt a social media approach, let's say. So we're quite happy to have people just post stuff and like them. But we know that organisations do far more with Viva Engage Yammer than that. So we can sort of say, well, look, you're doing pretty well on the social media front, but there's an awful lot more value you can get from a platform like that. So we have our maturity models, and those models are they have quantitative measures, so we can place people along a maturity curve, whether that's with collaboration or communication. That does help people. They know that what they need to strive for. Most people, as I said, they don't necessarily want to be the best, but they certainly don't want to be the worst, and they certainly don't want to tell that to their executives. So as long as you can sort of show that you are at a certain point, and there's a place where you're heading for your target, then your executive are going to be happy. But if you say, well, we don't have a real idea where we are, we think we're better than somebody else or what have you, there's going to be this sort of doubt about whether you're really doing your job or not, sort of, because executives basically want to know, how do we stand? How do we stand against the competition? How do we stand against our peers and so forth? We may not necessarily want to be the best, but we definitely don't want to be the worst, so let me know what we need to do.
And what about the for some of our recent benchmark reports as well? I know that we've started to look at specific communities or at specific teams, and being able to pinpoint high performers. So not only are we looking at it on that overall organizational level and looking at that on an anonymous level, but Laurie, how do you look at, well, maybe it's communities and groups we start with. How do you benchmark those against each other?
I think this is a good point, because we know that the collaboration and the communication behaviours of large firms, these are people with 30, 40, 50, even 100,000 employees, are a lot different to those that are small, that might have, like us, you might have 30 or 40 or a few hundred even. But what we find is that, and in the current report we're doing, when we look at the group level, that levels the playing field quite a lot, because a group in a small company is pretty much the same size as a group in a big company, right? So we can compare groups between companies and feel confident that we're not being biased by the fact big or small. So we do that, and in the current sort of study, we are comparing organisational groups. So if you think about your Active Directory and where you sit, and groups in your formal organisation, typically, you will only be a member of one group, so you're pretty much in a hierarchy somewhere. So we can compare which, your group membership and how groups compare, if you like, as part of the formal organisation. But then when you look at teams, and teams can be formed across formal organisation groups, and in fact we say that's a good thing. Teams can vary in size as well, but typically they are comparable. In fact, within the SWOOP platform, we actually we use some AI techniques to auto classify your team, or your group for that matter, so that you get a sense of how you're working as a team. An example of that is like with our Teams product. Our aspirational team is the self-directed team, and over having done several years of benchmarking now, we know that the high-performing teams are self-directed, and we've got a way of characterising that. We know that some of the bigger teams are acting like forums; they're not really teams, and so forth. So we know that you can look at the character of your teams and know whether you are actually working towards having more self-sufficiency in your teams, or whether they're really just your groups and the senior leader just communicating rather than collaborating. So there's a lot we can do. You can do internally and sort of say, look, are these teams really working well or not? Are they too big? Are there too many people in them? How do we structure our digital teams? And I think this is an area that does require some attention. I think there's a lot of confusion in the Microsoft suite about how to use chat channels, Viva Engage. These discussions have gone on forever, but I think we've got to the point now that some parts of, as I said, what we have got better at is doing meetings, right? So we certainly see that people are better at digital meetings like here. They certainly use chat a lot, because that's what we use both in our private lives and our work lives. We find that things like working in a Teams channel, or setting one of those up, or even using Viva Engage discussions as communities, this is not as natural to us. There's an awful lot of people that aren't using those facilities at all. And I think that's impacting a lot on the potential performance of organisations. Just to throw out a quick statistic, I think we looked at about 125,000 people across 19 organisations. Something like over 70% of them hadn't posted in a channel, a Teams channel. Right? So, in fact, over 20% hadn't even posted into it. Right? So this is area that I'm calling the silent majority. There's people out there that aren't interacting hardly at all. And you might say, well, that's because they're back in the office now. Well, that's not true. In fact, the activity rates within Microsoft 365 and Teams has actually gone up 30% from last year, when we were more locked down. So this year we're meant to be more in the office. That's actually that's potentially has generated even more digital activity than when we're in the middle of COVID. So there's some very interesting artifacts coming from this situation we're in, where are we in the office, are we not, or what have you. And we have some ideas about what's happening there, but my sense is that even going back to the office doesn't mean people don't do less digitally. In fact, it probably energizes them to do more when they get back home and working on their own more. So so I think it's interesting times. And as I said, I think when you're in a complex sort of environment like we are now, whether we're transitioning one way or the other, you do need to measure. I mean, this is the only way out of a complex situation, is to measure, identify where you're at, identify the patterns that appear to be positive, we talk about things like amplifying the good and dampening the bad. This is the sort of thing, this is the situation we're in at the moment in this complex working transition that we're in.
And I think when it comes to, well, I guess that sort of leads to, what are the desired outcomes from benchmarking? I saw a few comments in the chat around, I think, Kim, you mentioned around, aligning your different business units to the parts of the business that are those collaboration champions and understanding what they're doing. Laurie, do you have any other thoughts on outcomes?
Yeah, well, I think that, the big thing that for me over the last couple of years is how big the variation is in the skills of people in organisations that in collaborating. Now, we've seen some very good situations where the digital work people have sort of worked with different parts of the business and managed to get them performing at an extremely high rate. And we know this because we actually measure this, and we go back and we interview them, and Sharon actually solicits stories from them, and we know all of those sorts of things. But what we don't see, what I'm calling the silent majority, right? These are the people that really are still solo working. They're sort of, I'm not suggesting they're not doing anything, but they're certainly not interacting with other people as much as they should be. So, the potential for misalignment is very high. And I think this should be a concern for organisations because, we've been told from survey-based, studies that, people are in too many.
I think we've just lost Laurie for a second there. Sorry about that, everyone. Laurie, if you can hear me, you might just need to do a quick, maybe reconnect to Teams or something. But I might even just probably move through. Oh, all good. I'll let you.
I'm happy to jump in now, Emily, if you're...
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe Teams knew that Laurie was wrapping up.
Is that right?
Yeah, so I'm going to share some of these examples of how benchmarking has uncovered teams. Laurie's still going, uncovered teams and uncovered things that otherwise may not have been seen, or some of the ways that organisations are using benchmarking. So when we did our Viva Engage and Yammer benchmarking at the end of last year, we benchmarked almost 100 organisations, and it was like millions of interactions. And for the first time ever, the top benchmarking organisation was a medium-sized organisation. So traditionally we find that the small size organisations perform a lot better in benchmarking than bigger organisations, but for the first time it was a medium size, which was Westpac New Zealand. And I will share with you in a moment the case study. There's some really good examples in there of what they were doing. One of the things, though, that they found is, Emily, wasn't it like a few weeks before we contacted them? So when we do the benchmarking, we obviously can see organisations, but we have ID numbers for individual communities and teams. So we have to go to those organisations to find out, what those teams or communities might be. And so it was a few weeks before we contacted Fiona at Westpac New Zealand to say that they'd won the whole one. I mean, they had the highest ranking out of all our benchmarked organisations. And she was a bit down, wasn't she, Emily? Because some of her measures had actually started to drop. And she was like, oh, what are we going to do to pick up engagement? And so then when we came back to her, she was like, no, this can't be right. We're dropping in measures. What we found, though, after measuring, those millions of interactions, 100 organisations, was overall things like Yammer participation had dropped. And so even though some of Westpac New Zealand's measures had dropped, it was still actually performing better than anybody else. So even things like that, I think, can be very helpful for you guys as in internal comms and maybe community managers or facilitators, just to know where those benchmarks are that you actually could be going really well, even though you may not be meeting all the goals that you had set previously. Another really important part of our benchmarking is identifying best practice that's happening within your organisation already. I've got this example from Humana, and I thought of it just beforehand. There's also another example I'm going to jump to, and it's a soft drink beverage company that I can't name at the moment that shares the same colour as us. And we were benchmarking them, and they found their top, it was a Teams community actually, I think, and they were, we weren't allowed to actually write this story, but we met with the team and heard all about everything that they were doing, so much so that this company ended up doing videos, ended up doing case studies to showcase internally within their organisation of what best practice looks like. And I think that's something that's really important with our benchmarking, is to be able to showcase best practice that's already happening within your organisation. And by doing the benchmarking, we can identify those organisations. Humana was another really good example. They, when we did some Teams benchmarking, here it was, they were ranked number 4 out of almost 100,000 teams that we benchmarked. And Humana's a private health insurance company in the US, huge company. And they had never heard of this team before that we identified, but it was such a great example of working collaboratively. So there were 4 team leads in this team. I think one was in Puerto Rico, one in Wisconsin, 2 in Kentucky, and they're able to manage an entire working from home team that looks at customer complaints. So for example, they were using examples if you were you're an elderly person, you can't drive, but you need to get to a medical appointment. So they organise transport, and sometimes that transport may not turn up. So what they'll jump in onto their team very quickly and say, you know, transport hasn't arrived for this customer. Has anyone got another transport company that we can call on quickly so they can still make their medical appointment? And it was just a really great example of collaboration happening across geography and across teams. But the internal comms team had never even heard of this team. So again, it was a really great example of them being able to showcase best practice within their organisation. And I'll share in the link in a moment the case study to this one. Oh, this is Syngenta that I was mentioning, Kim, in the chat. So they're the world's largest agriculture company, I think, or scientific agriculture company. You know, they do a lot of seeding and that sort of thing. I think it's a company with about 60 or 70,000 employees around the world. Anyway, at their annual leaders conference, this is a bit of an old story, but they still do it each year. They get the SWOOP dashboard up and they benchmark all of their leaders. So you'll see that screenshot in the left-hand corner was actually a real one that they put up on the screen at the leadership conference, and they ranked everybody with the top 10. Now, it wasn't naming and shaming at all. This was just purely within leaders, but it really did work for them because they had so many people coming up to them saying, well, how can I improve my SWOOP persona? How can I be more engaged? The reason that they did this is because they found that, and I'm sure you guys will find the same thing too, if your leader is using these tools and Viva Engage or even Microsoft Teams, if your leader's on there, there's more chance that it's going to bring all of those employees and all of the other teams using the same products as well. So it had a really big impact doing this. And I referred to, there's actually one of the big 4 banks in Australia, the former CEO had the same thing. He had the SWOOP dashboard on a big TV screen in his office. And again, we've got permission to tell this story and share it privately, but not publicly. And so when his C-suite would come into his office, they could see where they were ranked on the SWOOP dashboard with the benchmarking of leaders. And again, it was a bit of a wake-up call for some people. So I'm just reading some of these comments. I love that the leader did that on the screen, not the comms person. Yeah, very powerful with the CEO doing it. And then, as Laurie referred to earlier, just last week I was doing a case study for our next benchmarking report, and it was from Virgin Media O2, which is the UK's biggest telecommunications company. Just last year they merged the two big ones, Virgin Media, O2, it's now the one company. And one of the teams that we identified as a top performer, when we met with them, it's a great story. It's a team that they have a program at Virgin Media O2 called Voice, and it's where every employee can contact their local representative if they've got an issue, and then using Teams, they have like divisional forums, and then it goes into national forums and meetings with the CEO, and they can actually make change through the organisation. And using the digital tools, it's like a bell curve. It starts at the employee, they put down their issue, and through using Teams, it gets communicated to the top. They end up having a face-to-face meeting at the top, and then change can happen coming back down, and it gets communicated back to those employees. Anyway, when we met with she was the regional representative from this Voice forum. We met with the whole team, and she said, "You've got to have the wrong team here. What we do when we communicate this way, it's nothing different to what anybody else, to what we do on a day-to-day basis." And we tried to make the point, as you can see there on the slide, it says only 24% of employees work collaboratively in Microsoft Teams channels. And when we pointed that out, it made the difference. She said that's just what we do day to day, because that's their culture. They work out loud in Teams, but we try to make the point that not everybody does, and I'm sure you guys have seen that not everybody works the way that you would like them to do it. So again, the benchmarking can really highlight some of those best practices.
I think it's important that like more often than not, the people don't know who their best teams are. And some of these teams have discovered how to work, not because they've been coached. Some have, of course, but some haven't. They've just worked it out themselves. For me, there's just such a peer-to-peer training gap. Wouldn't it be wonderful if people knew that these people were working well and that they were being externally benchmarked as working well, and in fact, they've got a good story to tell as well. There's just not enough of that. I think that one of the big challenges for the digital workplace facilitators is that for big organisations like Syngenta, you're only a handful of people, and you're trying to sort of influence, 70,000 people, of which I would say 50,000 aren't collaborating to the extent that they need to be. So we're certainly looking at that now, and for me, it's only through peer-to-peer support that you can actually get to that number of people. They're not going to sit down and watch the M365 training video from Microsoft for an hour, or from LinkedIn or what have you. It's going to be simply like you're being in a digital team and being coached by your peers, or working it out yourself even, the way that you're going to get better. I don't think there's any other way. I just can't conceive a different way of getting this to work. And certainly last year, and again it was re-emphasised this year, the variation in practices within teams has a big impact on how successful that team is. So the best teams actually have members that all work the same sort of way. And they've worked it out, whether they've done it formally with a charter, or if they're small enough, they can just tell each other, look, I'm going to do it this way, or we're going to put it in a channel, and we're going to structure our channels this way, and this is how we're going to use it. Whether it's done formally or informally, we know that when they do the same sort of things, they don't work in email, they don't send messages via email to each other, they work in, they still use chat, and they still probably use email talking to external people, but they just worked out what works, and I think that, a lot of organisations don't even know that they have high-performing teams that have worked out how to do it, and of course there's examples where the facilitators have helped teams. We've got examples of that too, haven't we, Sharon, where a team that we've benchmarked well has been the subject of some coaching, and that's very gratifying for the internal team that's happened. But it's really just scratching the surface. we really do need to work out a way of getting these sorts of skills to go viral.
Oh, that's actually a really good point. Again, last night I was writing this, a company at the NBN equivalent in the UK called City Fibre, and they had the sales team had a little bit of coaching to improve their collaboration. So they made the decision to stop working in email and chat and just start working in channels. And as a result, their data just went way up on the SWOOP dashboard. And again, just identifying best practices. So they were saying they're not at where they would like to be, but at least they've got a few teams within the organisation now that they can showcase what best practice looks like. So that was a combination of using the data to identify improvements and also some coaching of making that concerted effort to change collaboration habits.
Yeah, and we'll keep some of those insights as well as we'll ask you to download the actual report once it launches. We can get into some of that. Alan, I've just seen your note as well around talking a bit more around coaching and self-directed teams. I'll give a bit of a practical example of how you can do that as well in just a second. But I also wanted to make sure that we do get a chance to really go into the nitty-gritty of this as well if we want to get real practical about some of these benchmarks as well. And I just wanted to provide a few, I'm going to say my top 3 picks for benchmarks for communication. And then I also have some picks for collaboration as well. So for communication, if you're looking at Viva Engage or if you're looking at Workplace, I've organized this across those different phases of the maturity model that Laurie referred to earlier. So if you are at that platform adoption stage and you're wanting to understand what good looks like and what the benchmark is for interactive users, we're actually looking at more of a benchmark around that 38% mark. And that's looking at the percentage of people who are actually doing something. So it also makes it much clearer as well that the proportion of people who are actually collaborating is much smaller than those who are doing the reading as well. And that was one of those key findings we found in our Viva Engage benchmarking last year. You start to move up that maturity curve as well, looking at the connecting phase. The influencer risk score is a really handy one to look at. If you are looking at your key influencers and finding those specific collaboration champions in your organisation, I do encourage you to have a look at this. Unlike some of the other metrics that you'll find within SWOOP anyway, the lower the score, the better for this one. So if you're aiming for somewhere around 14% or lower, that just means that you aren't over relying on the people up the top of your influencer list. So you don't want, your top 1 and your top 2 influencers driving all of the conversation and then seeing a massive drop between 2nd and 3rd place. You want that to be much more evenly spread. So benchmarking around that can also be really handy. And then if you move up to those much more mature phases, if you're looking at innovation and problem solving, the curiosity index is also a really good indicator for that too. So looking at the proportion of messages where people are asking questions, 17% is a really good benchmark to aim toward. So yes, again, if you're wanting to have a look at some of our benchmark reports for those specific benchmarks or a lot of these targets or the more aspirational recommended targets, you can also see directly in SWOOP too. But then even looking at this on the collaboration level, if you're wanting to see best practice for how often you send email versus how much you're collaborating in those open spaces like Teams, Viva Engage, Workplace, if you're sending less than 30 emails for every one of those messages, looking across our benchmark, we would say that's actually quite a good target to aim toward. Similar thinking applying to that asynchronous collaborator habit. So if you are looking at some of the M365 collaboration habits, you want people to be spending a little bit less time in meetings and hopefully shifting more of that into those asynchronous ways of working. And then I've also included a benchmark there around 2-way relationships. So this could apply to Viva Engage, Workplace, Microsoft Teams, and the way that you collaborate in channels. So that 2-way relationship is formed when 2 individuals are interacting with each other. If you have one person responding to the other, or if you have one person posting and then one person responding, that's still only classified as a 1-way connection. But when that person responds back, that's when that 2-way relationship is formed. So the more of those that you have, the stronger those connections, and then hopefully the more meaningful those conversations are as well. So just to draw your attention to some of those top picks as well. And I know that we are in the thick of benchmarking across M365 and Teams at the moment. Of course, we are also doing our Viva Engage or Yammer benchmarking at the end of the year as well. But because we are now looking across SharePoint and intranet as well, we're looking forward to being able to provide some of these benchmarks for SharePoint as well, if that's something that you're currently interested in. And even over the last few months, I've had quite a few customers asking about benchmarks for, typical time on page or page views, those sorts of things. So if you are interested in having a look more closely at SharePoint benchmarks, please do let us know. Or even if you have, similar to the question that we asked in the Menti poll earlier, what are some of the questions you would like to be answered using benchmarking? If you think about that through that SharePoint lens, I'll let you sit on that, as we get towards the end of the session at the moment. But, if you want to pop them in the chat or if you want to let us know, then it all helps with the way that we shape the benchmarking for SharePoint as well. So I'll just keep that there as a bit of a thought starter if there's anything you think might be interesting to share. Now, this does get into some of that kind of coaching side of things and the way that you can also benchmark internally using SWOOP. So, of course, you do have those external benchmarks through our benchmarking studies. But I also just wanted to quickly show you, because it is some of the benchmarking, they are some of those features within SWOOP that can sometimes get missed. They're not necessarily advanced or hard to use features, but I'd say there probably are some of the more advanced features in the tool, and they do also in some cases require you to have some extra admin permission. So if you do look at SWOOP and you can't see these features in the dashboard right now for yourself, then you might just have to talk to your SWOOP admin to have all of that set up. But if we're looking at YAML, or if you're looking at or Viva Engage or Workplace, you would be able to go in and do some benchmarking of communities, for example, and you'll always have where you can do the benchmarking. You'll see that benchmarking category in your dashboard. That's where you'll be able to then go in and pull together a list of, maybe you're an admin of a few different communities, or you'd like to look across your official communities. Let's say I want to call this one my communities 1, so we don't have a duplicate name, and then I can start to pull together some of the names of the communities that I am currently running, perhaps, or maybe I'm the community manager or the group manager. And when I click OK, that's when SWOOP will give me that really simple benchmark to show how they stack up against each other, whether that be looking at, just purely looking at the membership of those. But then we also get into some more of those engagement and collaboration type metrics. So being able to deep dive into the curiosity index, or understanding if you're meeting some of those benchmarks around platform adoption or adoption within your community as well. So you can look at that for communities or groups across more of your enterprise social. I might just have to reload this one, if you just bear with me a second. Looking at this in Teams as well, you do require the admin permissions for this. And if you were wanting to, let's say you're wanting to find all of the different team types that you have for every single team that you have currently running on Microsoft Teams. So Alan, to your example in the chat, we're wanting to find all of our self-directed teams in the organization, understand the way that they work, and then see if we can somehow replicate that or align that with some of the other teams that perhaps aren't working in the most effective and efficient way right now. And the way that you can do that really simply, we've got a great export. If you go into your admin settings, if you go into data export, and you'll see this option here called Teams Export. And I do have an example here of what I prepared earlier. So you can click on this and then it will start to tick over and do the analysis for you. But once that download's complete, if I just give you a quick view, and this is real SWOOP data, we're sort of putting everything out on the table here for you, then I can see all of these different teams. I get a nice breakdown of the activity that's happening, and then I can also really quickly surface what the team persona is. So if we're wanting to go in and find where all of our self-directed teams are in an organization, so that those teams where they do have, a connected core, there aren't a heap of people that are operating in a sort of passive gallery, high levels of two-way connections and two-way relationships, we know that these are the parts of the business where that is actually happening. And then we also have our other team types like communities, single leader teams, forums, but also being able to find some of those disconnected teams as well if you're wanting to find those really distinct pockets that do need some of that extra support and coaching as well. And if I can then also just jump really quickly as well across into the M365 focus metrics. Oh, I'm just lost my, lost the actual webinar. There you are. The way that you could, or just an example of this as well, is if you wanted to maybe do some benchmarking across job titles as well. If you're wanting to find the job roles and the job titles, how people compare. So I might not walk through this stage. I think I've got an example here from earlier, job titles. So you can then go in and search for the names of those job titles, see what their overall collaboration scores are. And if there are any that seem to be lagging a little bit, for example, the legal associate job role, then we can go and deep dive and see what are the behaviors where they need some extra help. So if we go through here, we can see maybe it's this asynchronous collaborator habit where they're scoring quite low. How do we coach them into more asynchronous ways of working? Then you can even get into really specific activity focus metrics, see exactly how many minutes they're spending in meetings versus how often they're collaborating in Teams or Viva Engage, Workplace, whatever it may be as well. So I just wanted to make sure that you had a few of those practical examples and how you can potentially measure this as well using SWOOP. If I just jump back into the slide as well, we do.
Emily, can I just Karina's got a really good question there. How can you identify redundant teams or redundant communities as well?
Oh, okay. Yes, so Karina, that example that I showed just earlier with the team export, that would be the best way to find those teams straight away. You can find in that export, you'll also be able to see when the team was last active. So if you wanted to maybe set yourself, whatever parameters they may be, if it's a team that hasn't been active in the last 6 months, you can then really easily pinpoint where those teams are there. And I think similar applies to communities and groups as well. There's also a community export that you can do in SWOOP. There's a group export that you can do as well. So those are just handy things to have all of that data in one place, and you can do all the filtering, and opportunities are endless. But great question. Thank you, Karina. I just also wanted to draw your attention to some of the custom benchmarking that we offer. It's a completely free service that we offer. So if you're really wanting to take advantage and you're ready to see how your organization stacks up, we can produce a free custom benchmark report for you. If you're already using SWOOP and it's been a little while since you've had your last custom report, let me know and we can get all of that moving for you. But that applies across Teams, M365, Viva Engage, Workplace, whatever you'd like. We can have a look at those specific benchmarks for your organization. So just let us know if you'd like to be a part of that. And we also have our M365 and Teams benchmark report coming out at the end of May as well. So fresh insights that Laurie's working through right now. We've got the case studies that we're working on right now. So if you want to receive that report as soon as it's ready, you can just register through our website, and that's what the QR code there is for.